In this video, I'm going to show you another very spectacular game played at the Shenzhen Masters in China. It's Daniil Dubov from Russia playing with the white pieces against Anish Giri. And Giri won his game in a very spectacular way in round 1. I covered that game on the channel, so make sure to check out that game as well. And if you do like my videos, please subscribe to the channel and I will cover many more exciting games in the future. Now we are going to see Daniil Dubov against Anish Giri. Dubov is also, like Giri, a very strong theoretician, and in this game we get a big opening fight. It's one of the most popular openings in chess, and it starts with one d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, and now the move d5. This is a very nice dynamical system, the Grunfeld opening, which was popularized by players like Bobby Fischer and of course also by Garry Kasparov. And nowadays it's a popular opening variation for a lot of strong grandmasters. We go to see the exchange variations. C takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3. So here you see that white is having a very nice pawn center. It's black's task to challenge it. So bishop g7, knight f3, and black plays the move c5. This is all very thematical, and here Dubov goes for the system bishop b5 check. Black has different ways of blocking the check, but he decides to bring out the knight to c6. Castling kingside, and here black is actually threatening to win the pawn on d4 because the pawn, the knight, the bishop and the queen, they are all attacking that pawn on d4. So therefore bishop takes c6 played. B takes c6, and now the queen goes to c2. So the queen anticipates potential pressure of the bishop coming to g4, pinning the knight on f3. Here, c takes d4 played, c takes d4, and the bishop comes to g4 anyway. So you see there's massive pressure indirectly against the pawn on d4. White goes for the move knight e5, attacking the bishop, as well as the pawn on c6, but now also the pawn on d4 is hanging, so black captures. Queen takes d4, so that if you do take the bishop on g4, the rook on a1 can be taken. Therefore, this move, bishop b2, is played, attacking the queen, defending the knight, of course. And after the queen goes away, the bishop on g4 can be taken. So the queen has only one square. Queen b6, very important move, so that if you do take, the diagonal for the bishop will be opened and black is able to take the bishop on b2. Therefore, rook a b1, supporting the bishop and also setting up potential threats against the queen on b6. And here black decides to give up the bishop for the knight. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5. Now the rook hits the queen, and the queen goes to a5 to attack the bishop, and the bishop goes back to c3 to attack the queen. So everything comes with tempo. It's a really sharp game, and the queen comes to c5 to pin the bishop on c3. Now you may think why we are going so fast. Well, this is all well-known opening theory at the highest level, has been played by various strong grandmasters, and well, the most common way of playing here is to put the queen on b2 to set up a battery with the queen and the bishop along these dark squares. So white is dreaming of some sort of mating attack. You're pawn down as white, but thanks to the presence of opposite colored bishops, black is really vulnerable on these dark squares. Now queen b2, it's an interesting move, but Dubov goes for a slightly different version. He goes for this idea with the move a3. He hits the bishop, and now the bishop goes back to e6. Now, interestingly, this position has only been reached in about 5 games or so, but in one of these games it was Dubov playing with the white pieces, and in another game it was Giri playing with the black pieces. So both players, they are familiar with this position. In these games, the move rook fd1 was played, which is an interesting move, but here Dubov comes up with a very interesting novelty as he goes with the king to h2. This looks very slow, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward because white wants to launch its f-pawn, and that was not possible when the king was still on g1. Therefore, the move king h2. How is Giri going to respond? He goes for the move rook ab8. Obviously, the more pieces are getting exchanged, the better it will be for black. He is having an extra pawn, and therefore white is keeping the rooks on the board. Rook b to c1. I think that's a good move, so that the rook also supports the bishop, and given a chance, the white queen would like to move away, so the bishop is defended by the rook in that case, and ideally the queen would, for instance, land on h6 with mating threats against the king. Queen c4 is played. Black is even threatening to take the pawn on a2, but we are not caring about pawns. f4 is played, and the pawn is about to go to f5 with ideas to hit the bishop and also to try to open up the king side. But there are some additional ideas as well. Black is not fearing anything here, just captures the pawn on a2 and even offers the exchange of queens. The bishop, of course, defends the queen. White, once again, not interested in the exchange of queens, brings the queen to d1. So you're 2 pawns down, but at the same time, black's pawns, they are not really far advanced at all. Bishop comes to c4, hits the rook on f1. But here, look at this. Rook f3 is played. And what is this rook doing here? In fact, you're even allowing a move like bishop e2, which was not played in the game. But it's a double attack, so we definitely should check it out. I think in that case, Dubov's idea would have been to play the move queen d4, threatening checkmate on g7. And if you play f6, the queen can even come back to f2 to pin the bishop on e2. And there's no time to win the rook after something like bishop c4 offering the exchange of queens. White will just continue playing with all the major pieces on the board, as well as the opposite colored bishops, and with threats of, for instance, taking the pawn on e7. I think white is still having quite a nice initiative. Anyway, this was not played in the game, and instead of playing the move bishop e2, black decided here to block the diagonal by playing the move f6. So now it will be harder for white trying to open up that diagonal, but there are still ideas. The queen first goes to e1. I like the strategy of placing all your pieces on dark squares, so the queen has possibilities to come over to h4. But most importantly, the main idea here for white is to get in the move e5 at the right moment, to challenge the pawn on f6 and try to open up the diagonal so that you're trying to exploit the weaknesses around the black king. Well, black played the move queen e2, once again offering the exchange of queens, and white is not going to cooperate. Places the queen on h4. That is a good move. The queen is fantastically placed here. And interestingly, it is another pawn sacrifice. You are already 2 pawns down, and black has the opportunity to take the pawn on e4, which was not played in the game. But maybe this is something Giri should have considered better, because he didn't go for this line because of rook e1. When the queen is under threat, and once the queen goes away, the rook enters on e7. White regains the pawn, even threatens checkmate on h7. And here you got to be very careful. If you play something like rook f7, well, you can take. Black cannot take with the king because of queen takes h7, and well, that looks very bad. And if you take with the bishop, well, there's bishop takes f6, and the bishop gets what it wants, and it's clear that the black king is much more vulnerable. However, instead of playing the move rook f7, the key move here, and that's probably difficult to anticipate and evaluate from afar, it's the move h5. Black is moving all its pawns in front of the king, but the idea is to play moves like rook be8 and rook f7. You're trying to consolidate your position around the king, and objectively speaking, black should be able to hold this. In any case, this was not played, and Giri decided to play here the move bishop d3. So instead of taking the pawn on e4 with the queen, he is trying to take with the bishop. But look at this, white just continues with the move e5. That's a beautiful idea. As I said, the idea is to get rid of that pawn on f6. And now there are various ways of playing here. Of course, black never really wants to take on e5. You do take back with the bishop, and white is just getting a sort of free attack with ideas to take on c6, take the pawn on e7, or just get the queen to h6, also the rook can come to g3, and when you have rooks on c6 and g3, there are even threats to take on g6. So that's something black can definitely not afford. The attempt to keep the position closed with the move f5 is also not recommendable here because of the move e6. So the diagonal for the bishop will be opened anyway. That pawn on e6 cannot be taken because the bishop on d3 is just hanging. White can capture it. And any alternatives are also not going to work out. For instance, if you put a bishop on e4 threatening the rook on f3, well then white is just capturing on e7, threatening checkmate on g7. While, for instance, if you defend the pawn on e7 with a rook, then the queen hits the king from the other side. There's nothing you can do against the mating threat of queen g7. So, back to the game. Giri played here, instead of moving the pawn, the move bishop e4 right away, hitting the rook. And if the rook goes away, well, you also got to reckon with mate on g2. Well, simple choice here, rook g3. Just moving the rook, and the rook defends the pawn. And who knows, maybe at some point it can even hit the king on the g-file. And still, the threats are there. Taking on f6, it's a very difficult threat to meet. And there's also no real counterplay. It's almost impossible for black to get the rooks involved. Well, rook b1 was played. So here you see that Giri is trying to swap the rooks. Now, white cannot avoid it. Rook takes b1, bishop takes b1. So the rooks are coming off the board, but the pawn on f6 is now hanging. E takes f6, bishop takes f6, and once again, white is only a pawn down, but most importantly, you have succeeded in getting what you want. So you can now just stay on this diagonal with your bishop and try to get the queen involved. Well, bishop was attacked now by the queen, queen e6, and the bishop goes to e5. That's a nice solid move. So the pawn supports the bishop. So bishop is absolutely safe. Bishop e4 was played. And it should be said that something like queen h6, rook f7 doesn't really help white that much. And I was very impressed with the play of Dubov at this stage, because a lot of people would just think about how to attack the king. But Dubov has a different idea. He played here the move rook a3, attacking the pawn on a7. Now, for instance, if you play rook f7 to defend the pawn on the 7th rank, well, the queen comes to d8 with check, and if you block with the rook, the queen comes back to d4, it hits the bishop, and also the pawn on a7 will be taken next. So therefore, rook f7 is not good. Queen d7 was played in the game, but now the queen comes back to f2, and you see that white is trying to win the pawn on a7. Still, rook f7 is probably the way to go, to try to keep everything defended. But instead, Giri played here this move, queen e7. He is attacking the rook on a3, and he is setting a little trap here, because his idea is that if you do take the pawn on a7, there is queen takes e5, capturing the bishop, and taking the queen is met by rook takes f2. Fortunately for white, if this would happen, there is still queen a2 check when you're threatening to take the queen, and then after queen d5, queen b2, threatening checkmate. The only way to stop the mate is rook f7, but that leads to a repetition of moves. Well, anyway, there's absolutely no reason for white to capture the pawn on a7. And the move played by Dubov is way stronger. He just moves the queen away to e3. So the queen is no longer standing on the e-file. You're threatening to take on a7. You're also hitting the bishop. And after rook f7, black defending the pawn on a7 one more time. Okay, you cannot really take the bishop yet because of queen takes a3. But wait a second. First, we play here this move, bishop b2. Beautiful idea. The bishop needs to make some space for the queen. It first of all defends the rook on a3. But white's plan is very simple, to create a battery with queen and bishop on these dark squares and then threaten checkmate on h8. So that's the ideal combination, with the bishop behind and the queen in front. Now you're having a very strong attacking duo. Well, the only way to defend against both threats is queen b4. So the queen covers both the c3 and d4 square. But rook b3 is a good move. Hits the queen. Queen goes to c4. Still, both squares are covered. But now the rook comes in with check. And you see the bishop covers the g7 square. Rook f8 played. And now, rather than exchanging rooks, queen takes a7. It's now winning for white. You cannot take on b8 because white is not going to take back. But give checkmate on g7. So eventually the queen lands on g7. Well, instead there followed the move queen f7. So black is hoping to exchange some major pieces. But with the move queen d4, white is winning the game. Threatens checkmate on h8. But did you see that queen takes f4 can be played here? Well, look at this. There's just a calm move g3 attacking the queen and all the checks are over. The queen has to move, but white is also threatening checkmate on g7 or sometimes even on h8. And a very important detail here is that if you try to go for the exchange of queens with the move queen f2, white can simply capture it and the rook is not allowed to take because it's pinned by the rook on b8. So therefore, after the move g3, Dubov won the game. Giri resigned. I thought this was a very spectacular game. I hope you learned a lot about how to fight for the initiative with major pieces and opposite colored bishops. So I thought this was a very instructive game from the absolute highest level. Make sure, once again, to subscribe to the channel and very soon many more exciting games from this event. Stay tuned.